This week on That Shakespeare Life History Tidbits, we are going to explore the legend of Tom Bawcock, supposedly a 16th century fisherman who risked his life to save the village of Mousehole in Cornwall, England, from certain disaster. The word Bawcock is used in Shakespeare's plays as a compliment, and so today we're going to ask whether or not the legend of Tom Bawcock is real and how connected to Shakespeare's plays the story might be. Are you interested? Let's find out the history right now on That Shakespeare Life. The legend of Tom Bawcock is that one particularly cold and stormy winter in December, there was a town called Mousehole in Cornwall, England, that found itself without fish because the storms were battering the coast and it was too dangerous to go out and try and fish. And so the coastal town, who relied on fish as their primary source of sustenance, couldn't go and get fish out of the sea, and their stock they had in their town was quickly running out, and they couldn't go get more like they normally would because the storms just wouldn't let up. So there was one brave man named Tom Bawcock who decided to defy the risky conditions and risk both his life and his boat to go out into the water anyway. And his bravery was rewarded with a bounteous harvest as Tom Bawcock returns to Mousehole with his ship filled to the brim with at least 7 different kinds of fish and enough to feed the entire village. The story goes that the fish were baked into a giant pie that fed the entire town. And to remember Tom Bawcock's actions, every December 23rd, there's a festival in Mousehole, England, where they honor the heroism of Tom Bawcock. The festival includes a display of lights, there's parties and parades in the streets, children make lanterns, there's a display out on the water by the ships. And this particular festival also includes, as you might expect, a recreation of the pie. And the pie itself is called stargazy pie, and it's the wildest pie you're likely to ever see because it's a big pie made of 7 different kinds of fish, but the fish are cooked vertically where their faces are sticking up out of the top of the pie as if to be gazing at the sky. It was unclear exactly why the fish needed to be gazing at the sky when you fix this fish. Some people say it was I don't know. I don't know, because it was a starry night during a storm. I don't know. I don't know couldn't find where the reasoning was behind why the fish needed to stick out like that. But that's the tradition, and it's only made on this one day there in Cornwall. And the celebration itself is hyper local. It's only celebrated in this part of Cornwall every year. But travelers from all over the UK and tourists from all over the world will actually travel to Mousehole on December 23rd just to be a part of this weird little celebration that has been written about and talked about all over the world. So it's a really cool thing, but whether or not there really was a Tom Bawcock as far back as Shakespeare's lifetime, that part got really hard to pin down. And I'm going to say it starts to look unlikely. But we know that the tradition of serving stargazy pie started in at least the 1950s. There was a landlord at one of the local inns that said, hey, I think it would be fun to recreate this pie and serve it to people. And his version of the pie did contain 7 different kinds of fish. And he fixed it kind of like a marketing gimmick to get people to come in and celebrate this holiday and spend money at his inn. Now, the record of him doing this indicates that landlord was looking back at something older than the 1950s because he calls it a recreation of the pie. So I tried to find, well, what was he looking at? Because he had to have known about the legend of Tom Bawcock, and the legend included 7 fish because the landlord in the 1950s thought that's what his pie needed to have. So I tried to find if there was an older reference than the 1950s, and the only one I could find is a song called Tom Bawcock's Eve that was written in the 1910s by a man named Robert Nance. And he wrote it as his description of what might have been sung at earlier possible feasts. So it seems that even Robert Nance was pulling from something older than the 1910, so that would have been pushing the legend back into the 1800s. People from Mousehole, at least according to the Cornish blogs and websites I was poring over to try and get some local knowledge about this, connect Tom Bawcock with at least the 1800s. They claim to have been celebrating it for the last 100 years there in Mousehole. So it is a very old celebration. When it comes to connecting it all the way back to the 16th century and William Shakespeare, it seems that the use of the word Bawcock in Shakespeare's plays is connected to the legend of Tom Bawcock. But most people seem to think that the name Tom Bawcock might actually be an imaginary figure that they created to represent a generically good man, or someone who is full of bravery and heroism. You are a Tom Bawcock if you embody these values and character traits, almost like, calling someone a Yankee Doodle or something. It's a figure that in and of itself is not real, but it represents values that the community shares and wants to honor. So that's one theory. There is one 16th century story for Cornwall that I was able to find. I don't think it's connected to Tom Bawcock, but I'm going to mention it to you anyway. In 1595, apparently the Spanish Armada attempted to burn the village of Mousehole, and all the residents except one guy took off because they didn't want to get killed by the Armada. And that one man stayed to resist the town, and he was killed. However, his house was the only one to survive the burning of the village and is today celebrated as the oldest standing structure in Mousehole. It's known as Keigwin Arms, and it's there, and you can go and you can see it, and it does actually date to the 16th century, so you can go and see that. So why I can't find any relationship between Keigwin Arms and Tom Bawcock, despite the fact that every Cornish blog and website that I read about that's recounting this story, all of them claim that Tom Bawcock was a 16th century fisherman. But the history or the actual evidence for Tom Bawcock, at least what I could find, peters away around the mid-1800s. I couldn't find anything older than about 1850 that referenced Tom Bawcock. But nevertheless, it is an exciting story, and it does seem that the character was directly influenced by Shakespeare's use of the word Bawcock in his plays, and indeed the application of 16th century culture and the definition of that word, since that was a colloquial expression for Shakespeare's lifetime. So regardless of whether or not we can tie him actually to the 16th century, it is certainly a very cool reason to visit Cornwall for Christmas if you happen to be looking for some Christmas plants. Now, if you're interested in the history of fishing for sport that was actually from Shakespeare's lifetime, I have an episode all about that you can listen to right here. So go ahead and click that and explore the history of fishing from Shakespeare's lifetime.